"Get on my horse, handsome cowboy," said the Apache woman who refused to let the cowboy die alone. The sun had just begun to climb over the jagged peaks of the Arizona desert, painting the land with shades of gold and red. The air was dry and harsh, and the wind carried dust that scratched against the cowboy's face like tiny needles. His name was Thomas, a young cowboy who had grown up tending cattle and riding horses across the plains. He was used to the hardships of frontier life, but nothing had prepared him for the day he would find himself fighting for survival, completely alone. The morning had started like any other. Thomas was leading a small herd of cattle across a narrow canyon when the ground beneath the animals suddenly shifted. A startled herd caused a stampede, and chaos erupted. Thomas tried to control the frightened animals, whipping his horse into a gallop to steer them in the right direction, but the earth seemed to conspire against him. A sudden slip on loose gravel threw him violently to the ground. Pain shot through his leg, sharp and unrelenting. He tried to stand, but the pain made him collapse again. The herd had disappeared over the next ridge, leaving him behind, stranded in the vast emptiness of the desert. Hours passed, and Thomas struggled to gather his strength. The sun climbed higher, burning his skin, and he realized the dire reality of his situation. He was miles from the nearest settlement, and his horse had run off with the cattle. His water bag had been torn in the fall, leaving him with nothing to drink. Every breath felt heavy, and every movement brought more pain. He knew that if he didn't find help soon, the desert would claim him. His thoughts began to drift toward despair, and the fear of dying alone pressed heavily on his chest. Just as Thomas was beginning to lose hope, a movement in the distance caught his eye. At first, he thought it might be a mirage, the desert playing tricks on his exhausted mind. But as the figure drew closer, he realized it was a person. She was an Apache woman, moving with a grace and confidence that seemed almost otherworldly in the harsh landscape. She rode a horse, small but strong, her dark hair tied back with care. Her eyes were sharp, scanning the surroundings, and she approached with a mixture of caution and determination. Thomas tried to call out, but his voice was weak, barely audible over the wind. The woman noticed him struggling and slowed her horse, her gaze softening as she took in the sight of his injuries. She could see that he had fallen badly and that he would not survive alone in this unforgiving desert. Despite the risks, she made her decision quickly. She would not let him die. Survival, she knew, sometimes required courage not just for oneself but for others. She guided her horse closer, stopping a safe distance away. "Can you move?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Thomas shook his head, unable to speak, pain making even small movements unbearable. She dismounted with practiced ease, her boots sinking slightly into the dry sand. She approached him slowly, assessing his injuries with careful eyes. His leg was swollen and bruised, and he had cuts along his arms and forehead. The woman understood the severity immediately. He would not make it without help. "Don't worry," she said, more to herself than to him. "You're not going to die here." She lifted him gently, using her strength and skill to steady him. Thomas felt a wave of relief mixed with shame. He had grown up learning to be independent, to face hardship without relying on others, and yet here he was, completely dependent on a stranger. But as she supported him, he realized that pride could not save him. Only her courage and knowledge could keep him alive. She guided him to her horse, helping him climb onto the saddle. Thomas struggled to maintain his balance, every movement sending sharp pain through his leg. The woman steadied the horse, her hands sure and firm. "Hold on," she instructed. "We'll move slowly. One step at a time." Her voice carried authority, but also a quiet compassion that Thomas found comforting. He nodded weakly, trusting her despite his exhaustion and fear. As they began to move through the desert, the sun beat down relentlessly. The woman shaded him with her body when possible, occasionally offering water from a small container she carried. Thomas drank sparingly, knowing he could not waste the precious liquid. Every mile they traveled felt like a victory, but also a reminder of the distance he still had to cover. He noticed how effortlessly she navigated the rough terrain, her horse moving with a sure-footedness that he envied. She knew this land, its hidden dangers, and its ways of survival. He realized that his life depended not just on her bravery, but on her wisdom. Along the way, Thomas tried to speak, to offer words of thanks, but the effort exhausted him quickly. The woman seemed to understand, and she responded with quiet nods or a few simple words of reassurance. In her eyes, he saw a strength that was both fearless and gentle. She did not see him as weak. She saw him as someone in need of help, and she would give it without hesitation. In that moment, Thomas understood the true meaning of selflessness. The desert stretched endlessly around them. Cacti and scrub brush dotted the landscape, and the wind carried the scent of dry earth and distant wildflowers. Thomas's thoughts drifted to his life before this moment, his family, his dreams, and the countless small tasks of daily frontier life. All of that seemed far away now, dwarfed by the immediate struggle to survive. Yet even in this dire situation, he felt a strange sense of hope. Hope that he would live, and that there were people like her in the world, willing to act with courage and compassion when it mattered most. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the desert in oranges and purples, the woman found a small, shaded area near a rocky outcrop. She guided Thomas down from the horse, helping him rest against a large boulder. She carefully examined his injuries again, cleaning the cuts and wrapping them with strips of cloth from her pack. Her movements were precise, practiced, and kind. Thomas watched her, marveling at her skill and determination. She spoke little, but her presence was enough to calm his racing heart and ease his pain. Night began to fall, and the desert grew colder. The woman built a small fire, using dry wood she had collected during the day. The flames cast dancing shadows on the rocks, and the warmth was a welcome relief from the chill. She offered Thomas a small piece of bread and some water, ensuring he was as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. Thomas ate slowly, savoring each bite, and felt a deep gratitude for this stranger who had risked her own safety to save him. As he drifted into a restless sleep by the fire, Thomas reflected on the day's events. He had faced death alone, only to be saved by someone whose courage and kindness he would never forget. He realized that life in the frontier was unpredictable and often harsh, but it was moments like these that revealed the true strength of human spirit. In the darkness of the desert, he was not alone. Someone had refused to let him die, and that act of bravery had given him a second chance. The night passed slowly, filled with the sounds of the desert, distant owls, the rustle of small animals, and the whisper of the wind through the rocks. Thomas slept fitfully, but every time he stirred, he felt the reassuring presence of the Apache woman nearby. She kept watch through the night, ensuring that nothing threatened him, her vigilance unwavering. In that quiet, harsh wilderness, a bond of trust began to form between them, unspoken but powerful. By the first light of dawn, Thomas felt a renewed sense of hope. The pain was still there, but it was tempered by the knowledge that he had survived the night. The Apache woman had shown him that courage and compassion could appear in the most unexpected places. As the sun rose over the desert, casting long shadows across the sand, Thomas realized that his life had changed forever. He had encountered someone extraordinary, someone who refused to let him face death alone, and that act of kindness would stay with him for the rest of his days. The first light of morning painted the desert in soft shades of pink and gold. Thomas stirred slowly, the stiffness in his body reminding him of the injuries he had sustained the previous day. The Apache woman was already awake, tending to the small fire she had kept alive through the night. The flames crackled softly, casting warm light over the rocky terrain and the dusty ground around them. Thomas tried to sit up, wincing at the pain in his leg, and she immediately moved to help him, steadying his weight with careful hands. "Easy," she said calmly. "We need to move soon but slowly." Her voice was firm but kind, and Thomas felt a wave of gratitude. He had no choice but to rely on her entirely. Pride, which had always been his shield, had no place here. Survival demanded trust, and he felt the uncomfortable but necessary act of depending on someone else. He had heard tales of the Apache people from neighboring settlements, stories of bravery and resilience, but seeing it firsthand was far more powerful than any story. She guided him to her horse, helping him lift his injured leg over the saddle. The horse, a sturdy animal with a sleek dark coat, nickered softly as if sensing the need for patience and care. Thomas clutched the reins weakly, trying to maintain balance while the woman positioned herself beside him, ensuring he would not fall. "Hold tightly," she instructed. "We move slowly, no sudden steps." Thomas nodded, swallowing back the fear that threatened to rise in his chest. The desert stretched endlessly around them, a vast expanse of jagged rocks, sand, and hardy vegetation that seemed impossible to cross for someone in his condition. The woman rode with confidence, guiding the horse along paths that were not visible to Thomas. He noticed how she seemed to know every step, every stone, every subtle change in the terrain. Her familiarity with the land was evident in the careful yet steady pace she maintained. Each moment was a lesson in survival, though Thomas had no words to express his awe. The journey was not easy. Thomas's leg throbbed painfully with every movement, and the sun climbed higher, burning against his exposed skin. The woman offered him sips from her water container at intervals, her eyes scanning the horizon for signs of danger. Thomas drank slowly, aware that the water was precious. His body felt weak, and yet he pressed on, motivated by the determination of the woman beside him. Her courage was infectious, and he realized that survival was not merely a matter of physical strength, but of spirit and willpower. Along the way, she spoke little, but when she did, her words were measured and purposeful. She asked about his family, his work, and how he had ended up in such a desperate situation. Thomas answered as best he could, his voice strained from exhaustion and pain. He told her of his life on the frontier, of long days spent tending cattle and nights spent under the open sky. She listened with quiet attention, occasionally nodding, her expression revealing understanding rather than judgment. As the sun climbed to its peak, the desert grew hotter, and Thomas felt his energy waning. Every step of the horse seemed amplified through his pain, and he feared he might collapse. The woman noticed his struggle immediately. She adjusted the reins, encouraging the horse to move at a pace that would be steady but gentle. "We are close to water," she promised, her voice calm and unwavering. The words gave Thomas hope, though he had no way of knowing how far close truly was. Hours passed, and the desert's harsh beauty unfolded around them. Red cliffs rose in the distance, and cacti dotted the sand like silent sentinels. The wind carried the scent of dry earth and distant sage, mingling with the subtle smell of the horse. Thomas tried to focus on the scenery, drawing strength from the fact that he was moving, that he was still alive. The Apache woman's presence was a constant reassurance, a living shield against the unforgiving landscape. During brief pauses, she taught him simple survival techniques: how to find small sources of water hidden among rocks, how to use the sun's position to estimate direction, and how to observe animal tracks for signs of danger or opportunity. Thomas absorbed everything with a mix of awe and humility. Each lesson was a reminder of how little he knew of the land he had grown up near, and how essential knowledge and courage were for survival. The woman's skills were not just instinctive, they were honed through experience, and he felt fortunate to witness them firsthand. At one point, the terrain became more treacherous. A narrow ridge rose before them, flanked by steep drops on either side. The horse moved cautiously, guided by the woman's calm voice and steady hand. Thomas's heart pounded with fear, and he gripped the reins tightly, relying entirely on her guidance. "Trust the horse," she advised softly. "It knows the way." "We will be safe." Her confidence reassured him, and step by step, they made their way across the ridge, emerging on the other side with a renewed sense of relief and accomplishment. As afternoon approached, they came across a small oasis, a hidden pool of water surrounded by shade trees. The woman guided the horse carefully to the edge of the pool, helping Thomas drink slowly and rest. The cool water revived him more than he expected, and he felt a surge of gratitude that words could not fully express. The woman seemed to understand without needing them. Her eyes held a quiet satisfaction that he was still alive. They rested for a short while, shaded from the sun, and Thomas allowed himself to feel hope for the first time since the stampede. During this pause, Thomas observed the woman more closely. Her face was strong and determined, yet gentle. Her hands moved with precision, tending to both the horse and him. Her knowledge of the land was evident in every gesture, every decision she made. He realized that she had faced challenges far greater than any he had encountered, and had survived through courage, intelligence, and unwavering resolve. He felt a deep respect and admiration for her, understanding that her bravery was not born of recklessness, but of careful wisdom and experience. Night began to approach, and the desert grew cooler, the sky turning shades of purple and orange. The woman guided the horse to a small, sheltered area she had scouted earlier. She helped Thomas down, tending to his injuries and ensuring he was comfortable. They shared a small meal from her pack, bread and dried meat, and Thomas marveled at the simplicity yet sufficiency of it. She spoke little, yet every action communicated care, skill, and determination. In those quiet moments, Thomas realized that he had not just found a rescuer, but someone whose presence would change the course of his life. As darkness fell, they sat by a small fire, the flames flickering against the desert rocks. The woman kept watch, ensuring that Thomas could rest without fear. His body was exhausted, his mind racing with thoughts of the day's journey, the dangers he had faced, and the remarkable courage of the woman who had saved him. He thought about how fragile life could be in the desert, and how acts of bravery and compassion could mean the difference between life and death. Thomas drifted into a restless sleep, comforted by the fire's warmth and the woman's steady presence. Though his body ached and the journey ahead remained uncertain, he felt a renewed determination to survive. He had witnessed courage in its purest form, and it had inspired him. The woman had shown him that even in the harshest conditions, human kindness and bravery could shine through. When he woke the next morning, Thomas felt a quiet sense of hope. His injuries still throbbed, but he was alive, moving forward and guided by someone who refused to let him die alone. The desert, though still vast and unforgiving, seemed a little less daunting with her by his side. He realized that survival was not just about physical endurance, but about trust, determination, and the willingness to accept help when it was needed most. And in that realization, Thomas found strength he had never known before. The sun rose again, painting the desert with warm colors, but the air was already dry and hot. Thomas struggled to lift himself from the makeshift bed of blankets and rocks the Apache woman had arranged. His legs still throbbed with pain, and each movement sent a wave of discomfort through his body. Despite this, he felt a spark of hope. He had survived the night thanks to the woman's care and skill. She was already awake, feeding the horse and preparing a small pack of provisions for the journey ahead. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice calm and steady, though sharp with quiet authority. Thomas nodded, wincing as he adjusted his injured leg. He realized that the journey ahead would test them both. The desert was unforgiving, and though she had guided him this far, there were more dangers ahead: steep cliffs, wild animals, and the scorching heat that could weaken even the strongest. Yet he also realized that he was no longer alone. Her presence gave him courage, even when fear threatened to take hold. They mounted the horse together, with Thomas leaning heavily on her strength. The horse moved cautiously along the rocky trail, guided by her firm hand and patient instructions. As they traveled, she pointed out landmarks, small sources of water hidden among rocks, and patches of shade where they could rest. Thomas tried to remember every detail, not only because he wanted to survive, but also because he was beginning to trust her judgment completely. Her knowledge of the land was remarkable, and he realized that without her, he would never have navigated the desert safely. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher, burning down on them with relentless intensity. The heat was exhausting, and Thomas's body ached from his injuries. He could feel his strength fading, and he feared collapse, yet the woman never faltered. She encouraged him gently, offering water and small bites of dried meat to keep his energy up. Her patience was unwavering, her determination evident in every movement. Thomas began to understand that courage was not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was quiet, steady, and persistent. As they rode, they encountered small signs of life in the desert: lizards scuttling across rocks, birds circling high above, and the occasional coyote in the distance. Each sight reminded Thomas of the harshness of the land, but also of its beauty. The desert was not empty. It was alive, and every creature had a place in its unforgiving ecosystem. The woman seemed to understand this deeply. She moved with the rhythm of the land, guiding the horse carefully and speaking softly when necessary. Thomas watched her in awe, realizing that her courage and skill were matched by her respect for the natural world around them. Suddenly, a rustling sound came from a nearby thicket. The horse tensed, ears pricked forward, and Thomas's heart raced with fear. The woman signaled him to stay calm and leaned slightly forward, her eyes scanning the brush. A pair of coyotes emerged, their sharp eyes fixed on the horse. The woman's voice was firm but gentle, and she guided the horse slowly away, keeping a careful distance from the animals. Thomas realized that she had anticipated this danger long before it appeared. Her instincts were sharp, and her experience with the desert was a shield against the unexpected. As the day wore on, the terrain grew more challenging. They approached a narrow canyon, the walls steep and jagged. Loose rocks threatened every step, and the horse had to navigate carefully. Thomas's fear returned, but the woman remained calm, giving him precise instructions and steadying the horse whenever necessary. Step by step, they made their way through the canyon, each moment requiring focus, patience, and trust. Thomas felt his respect for her grow with every challenge they overcame together. During a brief pause, they rested beside a small spring, the water cool and refreshing against the scorching heat. Thomas drank slowly, feeling the life return to his body. The woman watched him closely, her eyes never leaving his face, ready to act if danger appeared. He tried to speak to express his gratitude, but the words failed him. Instead, he simply nodded, and she understood. There was a deep understanding between them that did not require words. In the silence of the desert, their trust had grown stronger than any spoken promise. As afternoon turned to evening, dark clouds began to gather on the horizon. The woman noticed immediately, scanning the sky with practiced eyes. "A storm is coming," she said quietly. "We need to find shelter." Thomas felt a surge of anxiety. The desert could be deadly in a storm, with flash floods and lightning strikes posing serious risks. Yet he trusted her completely. She guided the horse toward a small overhang in the canyon, a narrow space between rocks that would provide some protection from the wind and rain. The storm arrived quickly, wind whipping sand and dust into their faces, lightning flashing across the sky. Thomas held tightly to the horse, shivering as rain began to fall in sudden, cold sheets. The woman remained calm, steadying the horse and shielding him as best as she could. Her knowledge of the land and her quick thinking kept them safe from the worst of the storm. Thomas realized that survival was not just about strength. It was about courage, skill, and the ability to remain calm when danger approached. Through the night, they waited out the storm. The rain fell heavily, turning the desert into a slick and slippery landscape. Thomas's body ached from the cold and exhaustion, but he was alive. The woman tended to the horse and checked his injuries, ensuring that he remained as comfortable as possible. He watched her, amazed by her resilience. She had faced the storm with determination, and her courage had kept them both safe. He realized that her bravery was not just physical but moral. She had refused to leave him, even when the odds were against them. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the desert glistening with rain-soaked colors. The sun rose slowly, casting warm light over the rocks and sand. Thomas felt a renewed sense of determination. The storm had tested them, but they had survived together. He realized that the journey was about more than just reaching safety. It was about the bond that had formed between them, the trust and mutual respect that had grown in the harshest of conditions. They mounted the horse once again, continuing their journey through the desert. Thomas noticed how the woman guided the horse effortlessly, navigating paths he would never have dared to take. Each step forward was a victory, a testament to her skill and courage. He felt a growing admiration for her, not just for her ability to survive, but for her willingness to help someone in need, risking her own safety without hesitation. As the day wore on, they encountered more obstacles, steep ridges, narrow ledges, and rocky paths that tested their endurance. Thomas's injuries made each step painful, but he pressed on, encouraged by her steady presence. She offered him water, food, and words of reassurance, and he realized that he had come to rely on her not only for survival but for hope. In the face of danger, she had become a lifeline, guiding him through the desert with skill, courage, and unwavering determination. By evening, they reached a plateau overlooking a valley below. The view was breathtaking, the desert stretching endlessly, dotted with small trees, rocks, and distant mountains. Thomas took a deep breath, feeling a sense of awe and gratitude. The woman guided the horse to a safe spot, helping him down and ensuring he rested comfortably. They shared a small meal, and for the first time, Thomas allowed himself to feel a sense of accomplishment. They had faced the desert together, survived the storm, and continued moving forward. As night fell, Thomas reflected on the journey so far. The desert had tested them both, but it had also revealed the strength of the human spirit. He had seen courage in its purest form, not in grand gestures, but in quiet determination, skill, and compassion. The woman had risked everything to ensure his survival, and in doing so had taught him a lesson he would never forget. Bravery was not about pride or fearlessness. It was about action, responsibility, and the willingness to help others when it mattered most. The fire crackled softly as they sat together, the desert alive with the sounds of the night, rustling leaves, distant animals, and the gentle whisper of the wind. Thomas felt a deep sense of respect and admiration for the woman who had saved him, guiding him through the dangers of the desert with courage and skill. He knew that the journey was far from over, but for the first time he felt confident that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead together. The morning air was crisp, but the desert sun quickly grew strong, casting sharp shadows over the rocks and sand. Thomas struggled to rise, his body still aching from previous days' injuries and the storm they had endured. The Apache woman was already up, checking the horse and packing their modest supplies for the journey ahead. She glanced at him with a look of determination that both reassured and challenged him. Survival was still uncertain, but she would not let him face it alone. "Ready?" she asked quietly, though her eyes showed the intensity of the day ahead. Thomas nodded, wincing as he adjusted his leg. Every step was painful, and the desert terrain had become even more treacherous. He realized that the path to safety would not be easy, yet he trusted her completely. Her calm presence, skill, and knowledge had guided him this far, and he knew that without her he would have no chance. They mounted the horse carefully, Thomas leaning on her support. The animal moved with steady determination, guided by her confident hands and calm voice. She led them through a narrow canyon, the walls rising steeply on either side. Loose rocks threatened every step, and Thomas's heart raced with fear. He held onto the horse tightly, following her directions without question. Her eyes constantly scanned the terrain, calculating every move, and he marveled at her ability to anticipate danger before it even appeared. As they rode, dark clouds began to gather overhead. Thomas noticed the change immediately, a sense of unease settling in his chest. The woman also saw the storm approaching and guided them toward a safer area she had spotted during a previous journey. They moved quickly, but carefully, avoiding loose rocks and slippery paths. The wind began to pick up, carrying dust and sand into their faces. Lightning flashed in the distance, and Thomas's fear grew. He had never felt the desert so threatening, yet he also felt a strange sense of reassurance. With her guidance, he knew they could survive. Suddenly, the path narrowed even further, forcing them to ride along a steep ridge with sheer drops on either side. Thomas froze, his horse trembling slightly beneath him. The woman leaned close, her voice calm but firm. "You can do this. Trust the horse." "Trust me?" She guided the animal slowly, every step deliberate and careful. Thomas gripped the reins tightly, his muscles tense, but he followed her instructions. The ridge seemed endless, and each movement brought the threat of disaster, yet they pressed on, step by step. A sudden gust of wind nearly unbalanced the horse, and Thomas felt himself slipping. The woman reacted immediately, steadying both the horse and him. "Hold on!" she shouted, her strength and skill preventing a fall that would have been fatal. Thomas's heart pounded, adrenaline surging through his body. He realized that every moment in the desert was a test, a challenge to his courage and endurance. Yet, alongside fear, he also felt a growing respect and admiration for the woman who had risked so much to keep him alive. As they continued, the storm finally broke, sending a torrent of rain cascading over the desert. Lightning illuminated the jagged cliffs, and thunder rolled across the canyons like the roar of a giant. Thomas's body shivered from the cold, wet conditions, and his injuries throbbed painfully. The woman, however, remained calm, guiding the horse toward a small overhang where they could find some shelter. The rocks shielded them partially from the wind and rain, but the storm was fierce, and the danger was far from over. Thomas tried to speak to express his gratitude, but the effort exhausted him quickly. The woman seemed to understand without words. She quickly tended to his injuries, checking his leg and bandaging cuts that had been reopened by the journey. Every movement was precise, practiced, and efficient. She worked with a quiet determination, focused on keeping him alive. Thomas realized that her courage was not just in facing danger herself, but in refusing to leave someone else behind, no matter the risk. Hours passed as the storm raged around them. The rain soaked their clothing, and the wind battered the rocks and sand. Yet through it all, the woman's presence was steady and unwavering. She whispered encouragements, guided the horse, and made sure Thomas remained as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. He watched her work, amazed by her resilience and skill. She had faced challenges far greater than his own, and yet she met each one with patience and courage. As the storm began to ease, Thomas realized that their journey was far from over. The desert had changed. The rain had made the rocks slippery, the paths treacherous, and the risk of injury greater than ever. Yet they moved forward step by step, relying on each other for strength and guidance. Thomas's admiration for the woman grew with every challenge they overcame together. Her bravery, intelligence, and compassion had become a lifeline, and he knew that he would owe his survival to her. They continued through the canyon, navigating the newly formed streams and mud patches left by the storm. The horse moved carefully, guided by her steady hands, while Thomas struggled to keep his balance. At one point, he slipped and fell against a rock, pain shooting through his leg. The woman reacted immediately, helping him back onto the horse and ensuring he was secure. "We move slowly," she reminded him, "step by step." No rush. Her voice was calm but filled with determination, and Thomas felt a renewed sense of hope. As they emerged from the canyon, the landscape opened up into a wide valley. The desert stretched endlessly, now glistening with rain-soaked colors. Thomas felt a sense of awe and relief. They had survived the storm, the treacherous cliffs, and the challenges of the desert together. The woman guided the horse to a small shaded area near a rocky outcrop, helping Thomas down and allowing him to rest. She tended to his injuries once again, checking the bandages and ensuring that his leg was stable. They shared a small meal, and Thomas reflected on the journey so far. The desert had tested them both in ways he had never imagined. Every obstacle, every moment of danger had revealed the strength of the human spirit. He had witnessed courage in its purest form, not in grand gestures, but in quiet determination, skill, and compassion. The woman had risked her life to save him, refusing to let him face death alone, and in doing so, she had shown him the true meaning of bravery. As the sun began to set, Thomas realized that their journey had changed him. He had faced fear, pain, and uncertainty, yet he had survived. He had also formed a bond with the Apache woman, a connection built on trust, respect, and shared struggle. He understood that survival in the desert was not just about physical strength, but about courage, wisdom, and the willingness to help others when it was needed most. Night fell, and the desert grew quiet. The woman kept watch, tending the fire and ensuring that Thomas remained safe. He drifted into a restless sleep, comforted by her presence and the knowledge that he was not alone. The storm had been a turning point, testing their endurance and resolve, and they had emerged stronger and more determined. The bond between them had grown, and Thomas knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. By the early hours of the morning, Thomas awoke to find the desert calm and peaceful. The woman was already awake, preparing for the day's journey. He felt a renewed sense of determination, ready to continue despite the pain and exhaustion. The storm had passed, but the challenges of the desert remained. Yet with her by his side, he felt capable of facing whatever came next. The journey continued, each step a testament to their resilience and courage. Thomas realized that the desert had not only tested them, but had also revealed the depth of their strength and character. The woman's bravery and selflessness had saved his life, and he knew that he would never forget her. Their journey was far from over, but he felt a quiet confidence that together, they could overcome any obstacle the desert placed in their path. The morning sun broke over the horizon, painting the desert in warm gold and orange. Thomas stirred slowly, his body aching, but there was a renewed strength in him. The Apache woman had already prepared the horse and their small pack of supplies for the day's journey. She glanced at him with a determined expression that reassured him. After days of struggle, danger, and uncertainty, they were finally nearing safety. The settlement they had been moving toward was still miles away, but the end of the desert's trials was in sight. "Are you ready?" she asked softly, though her eyes reflected the long journey they had endured together. Thomas nodded, adjusting his leg carefully. Pain still shot through his body with every movement, but the thought of finally reaching help gave him courage. He had survived storms, treacherous cliffs, and exhaustion, but now the journey felt lighter, as though the desert itself was beginning to ease its grip. With her by his side, he felt that nothing could stop them. They mounted the horse together, Thomas leaning heavily on her support. The animal moved steadily, guided by the woman's confident hands and calm voice. As they rode through the desert, Thomas marveled at how familiar she was with every rock, every narrow path, every hidden danger. Her knowledge had been their lifeline, and he realized that without her, he would never have made it this far. He felt deep gratitude, but also admiration for her courage, skill, and unwavering determination. Hours passed, and the desert seemed to stretch endlessly, but Thomas noticed signs of life, small settlements, smoke rising from chimneys, and distant figures moving in the heat. Each sight filled him with hope and energy. He realized how close they were to safety, and a sense of relief washed over him. The journey had tested him physically, mentally, and emotionally, but the end was finally approaching. He also felt a profound respect for the woman who had refused to leave him alone, who had guided him every step of the way. As they continued, Thomas's mind wandered back over the days they had spent together. He remembered the stampede that had left him injured and alone, the scorching heat, the storm that had forced them to take shelter, and the treacherous ridges they had crossed. Each memory was a reminder of how fragile life could be, and how much courage and kindness mattered in the face of danger. He thought about the woman, her quiet strength, and how she had put her own safety at risk to ensure his survival. Her bravery had been constant, unwavering, and humbling. At one point, they came across a small stream running through the desert. The woman guided the horse carefully to the water, helping Thomas drink and rest for a moment. The cool water revived him more than he expected, and he felt a surge of energy that he hadn't had in days. The woman watched him closely, her eyes showing both concern and quiet satisfaction that he was still alive. She tended to the horse and adjusted the pack, preparing for the final stretch to the settlement. Thomas realized that her skill and determination had carried them through countless dangers, and he could not help but feel immense gratitude. The terrain became more forgiving as they approached the settlement. Rolling hills replaced jagged cliffs, and the desert's harshness began to soften. Thomas could see small houses and barns in the distance, smoke curling from chimneys. The sight filled him with hope and relief. The journey had been long and grueling, but the end was finally in sight. He felt a mixture of exhaustion and excitement, knowing that soon he would be safe, and the danger of the desert would no longer threaten him. As they entered the outskirts of the settlement, people began to notice the unusual pair, a cowboy clearly injured, riding with an Apache woman guiding him carefully. Villagers rushed out to help, offering water, blankets, and assistance. Thomas felt a wave of relief and gratitude. The woman guided him gently toward a small house where he could rest properly and receive medical care. Her actions had been steady, calm, and precise, and now the reward of survival was finally visible. Inside the house, Thomas was helped to a chair, and the woman tended to him one last time, checking his injuries and making sure he was comfortable. He looked at her, struggling to find the words to express his gratitude. She smiled softly, a gesture full of warmth and understanding. Thomas realized that her bravery had not been about recognition or reward. It had been about doing what was right, saving a life because she could. He felt a deep respect for her, knowing that she had risked everything to ensure his survival. Over the next few hours, Thomas rested, eating and drinking carefully while the villagers tended to his wounds. He could feel his strength returning slowly, and he began to reflect on the journey he had endured. The desert had been harsh, unforgiving, and full of danger, yet it had also revealed the strength of the human spirit. The Apache woman's courage had been the guiding force that had carried him through every challenge, and he knew he would never forget her. As the day passed, Thomas and the woman walked outside, the sun warming the settlement's small streets. Children and villagers watched with curiosity, impressed by the story they could imagine behind the pair. Thomas felt a deep sense of gratitude, not only for his survival but for the bond that had formed between them. It was a connection built on trust, courage, and shared struggle, one that words could scarcely capture. He understood that life had given him a second chance, and that it was because of her selflessness and determination. When it was time to say goodbye, Thomas felt a pang of emotion. He had come to rely on her, to trust her completely, and now the journey that had brought them together was ending. He looked into her eyes, searching for words, and found only gratitude, respect, and quiet admiration. She smiled, understanding without speaking, and Thomas realized that some bonds did not need words. They were felt in the heart, forged in the trials of life and danger. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice trembling slightly. "I wouldn't be here without you." She nodded, her expression calm but full of warmth. "You survived because you never gave up." I only helped you find your strength." Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of truth. Thomas understood that her courage had been both action and example, showing him what it meant to be brave in the face of adversity. With a final nod, she mounted her horse and prepared to leave. Thomas watched as she rode away, her figure gradually blending into the horizon. Though he felt a sense of sadness at their parting, he also felt profound gratitude and admiration. Her bravery, skill, and selflessness had given him a second chance at life, and he knew that he would carry the lessons of the journey with him forever. The villagers continued to tend to him, but Thomas's thoughts remained with the woman who had saved him. He reflected on the journey, the dangers they had faced, and the trust that had formed between them. He realized that survival was not just about physical endurance. It was about courage, compassion, and the willingness to act when others were in need. The Apache woman had shown him this in the most profound way possible. Over the following days, Thomas regained his strength. He moved carefully, tending to his injuries while reflecting on the lessons he had learned. The desert had been a harsh teacher, but it had also revealed the best of human character. He often thought of the woman, wondering about her life, her courage, and the challenges she had faced. Her actions had left an indelible mark on him, and he knew that he would carry her example with him for the rest of his life. Eventually, Thomas returned to his work, but he did so with a new perspective. He valued life and courage more deeply, and he understood the importance of helping others in need. He shared his story with others, not to boast, but to honor the woman who had risked everything to save him. Her bravery and selflessness became a source of inspiration, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, humanity could shine through. Years later, Thomas would often think back to that journey through the desert, the dangers, the storms, the treacherous cliffs, and the moments of fear. But above all, he remembered the Apache woman who had refused to let him die alone. She had shown him the true meaning of courage, compassion, and trust. And though they had parted ways, the impact of her actions remained with him, a guiding light in the challenges of life that would follow. The story of their journey became one he shared with anyone willing to listen. It was a tale not of adventure alone, but of human connection, bravery, and the power of one person's decision to act when it mattered most. Thomas never forgot her, and every time he faced difficulty, he remembered the lessons of the desert, the courage to face danger, the strength to persevere, and the generosity of spirit that could save a life.